Thanks for swinging by the channel. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some responses that we as human beings have following traumatic experiences. Most of us have heard of the fight or flight response. This is very accurate of something that our bodies do. Today I'd also like to throw in that there's a third F, and I refer to that as freezing. A little over a decade ago, I found myself sitting at home and felt a little bit dizzy. It was really strange. And I looked out the window and I noticed that the house that I could see next door was swaying back and forth. I realized that cognitively it didn't make any sense. I couldn't figure out why the house was swaying, and it took what felt like a long time to figure out that I was in the middle of an earthquake. What did I find my body doing? Actually, I just sat in my chair. This was surprising to me, as I had spent many years growing up doing drills at school, fire drills, earthquake drills, and I remember jumping under my desk or getting to doorways. Everybody tells you to find a bathtub or somewhere away from windows, but it was interesting to me that my own experience led me to sitting right there in the chair and not moving. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of these trauma responses. When we experience traumatic events, our body tends to take over and shuts down our ability to reason or to think. Part of that is because our brain shuts down all processes that are not necessary in order for survival. And that's kind of what a traumatic event is. It's where we experience situations where we feel like we might be in a life or death situation. When something like that happens, our limbic system takes over. And so it can kind of feel like our bodies become very active or very reactive. They might get hot and tense, and we just make decisions without thinking about them. That would be that flight and fight response. Our body generally tends to flow with energy. We get pumped with adrenaline, and we do what's necessary to remove ourselves from that situation. My situation, the freeze, was almost the opposite. It's almost like my limbic system totally shut down. We call it hypoarousal. My body just totally shut down. The interesting thing about this is that these are very common responses to traumatic events. We did an episode earlier on PTSD and how this can be something that we experience and what do we need to do in order to manage that. So if you're interested in that, check the other video. Here are a couple of things that are common among traumatic responses. Following a traumatic event, we might find ourselves having difficulty sleeping. One of the hallmark diagnostic criteria for a diagnosis of PTSD is nightmares. That's why we don't end up sleeping, or a portion of it. So one trauma response is difficulty with sleep hygiene and nightmares. Another big one is flashbacks. This might look like something where we're going about our day, and for whatever reason, we almost feel as though we are transported back in time and re-experiencing the traumatic event. One thing that comes with re-experiencing these traumatic experiences is that we might be doing our own thing, going about our business, and we feel, our body feels just like it did. Our body might get tight, it might get tense. We might have the urge to run or to scream while we're standing in line at the grocery store. Our body remembers these traumatic events. Another trauma response that's quite common is an extreme urge to avoid specific stimuli that was present during the traumatic experience. One example might be if you were in or a witness of a car accident that was quite terrible. We might find ourselves no longer driving on that road or going a different direction in order to get some place that we're looking to get to. We tend to avoid specific situations. Another area of traumatic response is a severe decline in social relationships. This could be because we lose friends because we're irritable. It could be because we don't feel up to the task of being around people. We might feel anxious about being around others. And in many cases, it might feel overwhelming to be around people who may ask us questions about that traumatic event. So then we have to relive that experience. Avoidance, flashbacks, and oftentimes poor sleep hygiene due to nightmares are pretty common trauma responses. One other area that I would like to highlight on just briefly in regards to traumatic responses is how these responses affect our relationships. We talked a little bit about how we will avoid relationships, but one other area that I want to suggest is that our relationships become very affected in many ways. One of those ways is that we may have very poor boundaries. We may find that we are chasing some type of emotional response from folks, and so we may do things or say things that we typically wouldn't do. In relationships following a traumatic experience, we might find that our ability to reason is drastically reduced, and so we end up second guessing ourselves. We question what people tell us, we question motives, we may even question what our own priorities are within the relationship. Oftentimes this can look like difficulty saying no when being invited to something, or having an inability or a perceived inability to vocalize our opinion or to stand up for what we are believing in. Social relationships can also be very dramatically affected, and this is part of a trauma response following a traumatic event. There are great options for treatment in the mental health field regarding PTSD and other trauma. If you are experiencing any of these symptoms, please seek out an individual that can help, whether it's a mental health therapist, whether it's a doctor who can prescribe medication. Don't wait on getting treatment. There are great treatment options and there are providers who are willing to help. I promise that these options can feel a little bit uncomfortable at first, but I promise you that they will be helpful in the long run. Thanks for tuning into the video. I hope it was somewhat educational and a little bit helpful. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.